She was the virgin destined to heal a tormented king. But when she knelt and said, "You may touch me, my lord," he refused. What happened next, even the gods dared not write. Watch this story until the end. You'll be surprised by this story. If you enjoy stories of love and romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. We post videos like this every day. Continuing. The desert wind blew with an ancient fury when Arya awoke on the last day of her life as she knew it. Or, at least that's what she believed at that moment, lying on the cold stones of the Temple of the Celestial Gaze, observing the stars that seemed to whisper ancient secrets. At 22, she had never known the touch of another human being except through sacred rituals, had never felt her skin burn with desire, had never questioned whether loneliness was really a fair price to pay for the gift she carried. But that morning, when the sun tinged the temple domes with gold, everything changed. The sound of horses' hooves echoed through the marble corridors like an omen. Arya felt a shiver run down her spine, a strange sensation she couldn't identify. It was as if something inside her recognized that sound, that approach, though her mind couldn't comprehend why. Grandmaster Kevin found her in the library, where she spent most of her days studying ancient manuscripts. He was a tall, solemn man with a white beard that reached his chest and eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom in the world. At that moment, however, there was something different in his demeanor, a concern he tried to hide, but which Arya, with her heightened sensitivity, immediately noticed. "Child," he said, using the affectionate term he always used with her, although Arya had long since ceased to be a child. "I need to speak with you." Arya closed the book she was reading, a treatise on the art of emotional absorption, and looked at him. "What happened, Master? I sense a disturbance in you." Kevin sighed heavily. "A royal caravan has arrived from the kingdom of Westeria. They bring the seal of King Richard III and a decree we cannot ignore." The king's name caused a strange reaction in Arya. Her heart raced for no apparent reason, and she felt a wave of heat rise through her body. It was as if every cell recognized that name, though she had never heard of him before. Or had she? There was something familiar, something that echoed somewhere deep in her memory. "What kind of decree?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "You've been summoned to the palace," Kevin replied, and the words fell like stones in the temple's silence. "Officially, to consecrate peace between the throne and the temple, but I know there's more behind it." Arya felt the world tremble beneath her feet. Her entire life had been prepared for this moment, for when her abilities would be required by the outside world. But now that the moment had come, she felt a mixture of terror and excitement? No, it couldn't be excitement. She had been trained to control her emotions, to not allow mundane feelings to interfere with her sacred mission. "When must I leave?" she asked, surprising herself with the firmness of her own voice. "Today," Kevin replied. "The caravan waits." "But Arya—" He hesitated, as if the words were difficult to pronounce. "There are rumors about the king. They say he is disturbed, that he suffers from visions, nightmares, that no doctor or sorcerer has been able to cure him." Arya nodded. She knew her function. As the last of the lineage of the Veil-bearers, she had the gift of absorbing pain, suffering, and trauma from others. But the price was high. Everything she absorbed became part of her, forever. That's why she had been kept isolated, virgin, not only in body but in spirit, so she could be a pure vessel. "There's something else," Kevin continued, his voice even lower. "There's an ancient manuscript written over 100 years ago that speaks of a veil-bearer who was called to the royal palace. Her name was Isabella. She never returned." The name Isabella caused an even more intense reaction in Arya. Her vision darkened for a moment, and she saw flashes of images that made no sense. A woman with black hair, tears running down a face that seemed familiar, blood on golden sand. She grabbed the table to keep from falling. "Arya!" Kevin held her by the shoulders. "What happened?" "I don't know," she whispered. "When you mentioned the name Isabella, I saw things, memories that aren't mine." Kevin's face paled. "That shouldn't be possible. You've never been exposed to external memories without performing a specific ritual. Arya composed herself, forcing herself to stand straight. It doesn't matter. If I'm needed, I'll go. It's my duty. Kevin studied her for a long moment. Are you sure? Once you leave, there's no guarantee you'll return the same person, or that you'll return at all. I'm sure, Arya replied, though deep down she felt she was lying. She wasn't sure of anything, but something was pulling her toward that destiny, something stronger than her own will. The following hours passed in a blur of preparations. Arya packed her few belongings, some sacred books, her ceremonial robes, the crystals she used for meditation. Kevin gave her an ancient amulet, a silver pendant with symbols she didn't recognize. It belonged to the first veil-bearer, he explained. It may protect you. The royal caravan consisted of 12 men, all dressed in the colors of the Kingdom of Westeria, deep blue and gold. The leader, a middle-aged man with scars on his face, introduced himself as Commander Harris. He looked at Arya with a mixture of respect and apprehension. Lady Arya, he said, bowing slightly, it is an honor to escort you to the palace. The king awaits your arrival with anxiety. There was something in the way he said anxiety that made Arya shiver. She mounted the horse prepared for her, a beautiful, nervous animal, as if it sensed the tension in the air, and the caravan departed. The journey to the Kingdom of Westeria took 3 days. During the journey, Arya tried to meditate, tried to prepare for what awaited her. But something was wrong. Her abilities seemed intensified, out of control. She could feel the emotions of the men around her, the fear, the curiosity, the concern. It was as if her mental barriers were breaking down. On the second night, camped near an oasis, Arya had a dream. She was in a luxurious room, lying on a bed of red silk. A man was over her, but she couldn't see his face. He whispered her name, but it wasn't Arya that he said. It was Isabella. She woke up gasping, with her heart beating erratically. "Nightmares?" Commander Harris asked. He was on guard, watching her with concern. "Something like that," she replied, trying to compose herself. "Commander, can you tell me about the king, about what afflicts him?" Harris hesitated. "It's not my place to question the designs of our Lord, but—" He looked around, making sure no one else was listening. "He changed a few years ago, became darker. He doesn't allow anyone to get close to him, doesn't sleep, doesn't eat properly. There are nights when his screams wake the entire palace. When did this begin?" "Since—" Harris stopped, as if he had said too much. "Since he lost someone very important to him." Arya felt that familiar sensation in her stomach. "Isabella." The commander looked at her with surprise. "How do you know that name?" "I just know," she answered, though she couldn't explain how. On the third morning, when the sun rose behind the dunes, Arya saw the Kingdom of Westeria for the first time. It was magnificent and terrifying at the same time. Tall towers rose against the blue sky with golden domes that shone like stars. Imposing walls surrounded the city, and flags fluttered in the wind. But there was something oppressive in the air, as if a dark cloud hung over all that magnificence. When the caravan crossed the main gates, Arya felt an enormous weight on her shoulders. People in the street stopped to look at her, whispering among themselves. Some made gestures she recognized as protection against evil. Others just watched her with curiosity. But all seemed to know who she was and why she was there. The palace was even more impressive up close. Built in white marble and decorated with intricate mosaics, it rose like an artificial mountain in the center of the city. Hanging gardens adorned its walls, and the sound of running water came from dozens of fountains. But even all that beauty couldn't mask the tense atmosphere that hung over the place. Arya was led through endless corridors, passing silent guards and servants who lowered their eyes when she passed. Finally, they reached a wing that seemed different from the others, older, darker. The walls here were decorated with faded tapestries, and the air smelled of incense and mystery. This was the harem, Harris explained, his voice echoing through the empty corridors. Now it's used only for special occasions. Arya was taken to a luxurious room, with a four-poster bed adorned with blue and gold silks. There was a balcony overlooking an inner courtyard, where she could see an ornate fountain and well-tended gardens. But what caught her attention most was a tapestry on the opposite wall. It depicted a woman with black hair, with eyes that seemed too familiar. "Who is she?" Arya asked, pointing to the tapestry. Harris followed her gaze and his face closed. "No one important," he answered quickly. "Just an old decoration. The king will receive you at sunset in the rose garden. Until then, rest." But Arya couldn't rest. She walked around the room, touching the silks, examining the objects. Everything there seemed familiar, as if she had been in that place before. When she approached the tapestry, she felt a wave of emotions so intense that she had to lean against the wall. Sadness, love, despair, betrayal, all mixed in an emotional storm that wasn't hers. It was then that she noticed something strange. There was a small discrepancy in the wall, near the tapestry, as if there was a secret door there. Without thinking twice, she began looking for some mechanism, some way to open that passage. Her fingers found a loose stone, and when she pressed it, part of the wall moved, revealing a secret chamber. Arya hesitated for a moment, looking at the dark passage. Her education at the temple had taught her to be cautious, not to get involved in matters that didn't concern her. But something stronger than her prudence pushed her forward. The secret chamber was small, illuminated only by the light coming from the room. But even in the dimness, Arya could see that there were objects there, chests, scrolls, and in the center a portrait framed by darkened silver. She approached slowly, and when she saw the face in the painting, her heart nearly stopped. It was her, or at least it was someone who could be her twin sister. The same dark eyes, the same face shape, the same black hair. But the woman in the painting was dressed in different clothes, luxurious silks, shining jewels, and around her neck a necklace that Arya immediately recognized. It was a sacred necklace of the veil-bearers, but a different, older version. In the lower corner of the frame there was a small silver plate with a name engraved, Isabella. Arya felt her legs weaken. That woman, Isabella, wasn't just a veil-bearer like her. It was as if they were the same person, separated only by time. What did that mean? Why was she there? And why did she feel that she knew every detail of that face, those eyes? She touched the frame of the portrait, and the moment her fingers met the cold silver, an explosion of visions invaded her mind. She saw Isabella running through the palace, corridors, laughing like a child. She saw her dancing in a hall full of people, her eyes shining with joy. She saw her crying in a dark room, whispering a name that made Arya's heart race. Richard. And then, the most intense vision of all. Isabella was in the arms of a tall, dark-haired man with eyes that burned like embers. He kissed her with desperate passion, whispering vows of eternal love. But something was wrong in the scene. Blood. There was blood on the man's hands and tears in Isabella's eyes, and a sense of finality, of farewell, of something being destroyed forever. Arya released the frame and staggered backward. Her breathing was irregular, and she felt as if she had been running for hours. What were those visions? Were they Isabella's memories? But how was that possible? She had never performed an absorption ritual, had never consciously touched something that could carry another person's essence. A sound coming from the room brought her back to reality. Footsteps approaching. Quickly she closed the secret passage and moved away from the tapestry, trying to appear casual. When the door opened, it was a young servant carrying a tray of food. "Lady Arya," the girl said, curtsying. "I brought something for you to eat before your meeting with the king." Arya nodded, thanking her, but as she ate, her mind was in turmoil. What else would she discover in that place? And what would happen when she finally met King Richard III? The sun was beginning to set when another servant came to fetch her. Arya was led through more corridors, passing guards and courtiers who watched her with barely disguised curiosity. Finally, they reached a large carved wooden door. From the other side, she could hear the sound of running water and the soft singing of birds. "The rose garden," the servant whispered. "The king awaits you." Arya took a deep breath. Her whole life had been preparation for this moment. She was a veil-bearer, trained to absorb the pain and suffering of others. But as the doors opened, revealing a garden bathed in the golden light of sunset, she felt that she wasn't prepared for anything that was to come. And then she saw him. Richard III was standing near a fountain, his back to her. He was tall and imposing, with black hair that reached his shoulders and a posture that radiated power and authority. When he turned to face her, Arya felt the world stop. They were the same eyes from the vision, the same eyes that had looked at Isabella with so much love and so much despair, and at that moment, Arya knew that her life, as she knew it, had come to an end. Richard III's eyes were like abysses that held terrible secrets. When he turned to face her, Arya felt every fiber of her being react in a way she had never experienced before. It wasn't just physical attraction, though her body responded in ways that left her confused and embarrassed. It was as if something deep inside her recognized this man, as if they had already met in another life, in another time. Richard observed her in silence for long moments, his eyes traversing every detail of her face with an intensity that made Arya feel naked, exposed. She had been trained to maintain composure in any situation, but at that moment, she felt like a lost child. "You are exactly as I expected," he finally said, his deep, hoarse voice echoing through the garden, and at the same time completely different. Arya tried to find her voice, but the words seemed to have fled from her. There was something hypnotic about that man, something that defied all her carefully constructed defenses. She could feel his pain even without touching him. It was like a dark cloud that enveloped him, dense and suffocating. "Your Majesty," she managed to say, curtsying, "I have come as requested." Richard approached slowly, like a predator circling its prey. With each step, Arya felt the tension in the air intensify. When he stopped just a few inches away, she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could perceive the musky scent of his skin. "Do you know why I brought you here?" he asked, his voice so low that only she could hear. To help you," she replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I heard you suffer from afflictions that no doctor has been able to cure." Richard laughed, but there was no humor in that sound. It was a bitter laugh, laden with pain and despair. "Afflictions," he repeated. "It's an interesting word to describe what torments me." He began to walk around her, always maintaining that dangerous distance. Arya could feel his eyes on her, analyzing, evaluating. It was as if he was trying to see through her soul. "Do you know the story of the last veil-bearer who came to my palace?" he suddenly asked. Arya's heart raced. "Isabella," she whispered before she could stop herself. Richard stopped abruptly, his eyes narrowing. "How do you know that name?" Arya swallowed hard. How could she explain the visions, the memories that weren't hers? "I found references to her in the temple archives." "Lie," Richard said, moving even closer. Now she could see the small lines around his eyes, the marks that pain had left on his face. "I can sense when someone lies to me. It's one of the few gifts this curse has granted me." "What curse?" Arya asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "The curse of remembering, of reliving, of carrying the weight of actions I cannot undo." Richard extended his hand toward her face, but stopped before touching her. "You have her eyes, exactly the same eyes." Arya felt tears she didn't understand burning in her eyes. "Tell me about her, about Isabella." Richard lowered his hand, moving away. "No. First, I need to know who you really are, because I have the impression that you're not just an ordinary veil-bearer." He gestured to a stone bench near the fountain. "Sit. Let's talk." Arya obeyed, feeling grateful to be able to support herself. Her legs were trembling, and she didn't know if it was from fear or from his proximity. Richard sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance but still close enough that she could feel his presence as an almost tangible force. "Tell me about your visions," he suddenly said. Arya stared at him, surprised. "How do you know about the visions?" "Because I have them too. Since you arrived at the palace, they've intensified. I see things I don't understand, feel things that shouldn't be possible. Richard leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Tell me what you see. Arya hesitated. All her education at the temple had taught her to be cautious, not to reveal her abilities to strangers. But Richard didn't seem like a stranger. He seemed like someone she had known for a long time, someone with whom she could share her deepest secrets. I see a woman, she began slowly. Black hair, eyes like mine. She is in love, desperately in love, but there's pain too, much suffering. Continue, Richard encouraged her, his voice tense. I see her in the arms of a man. They love each other, but something is wrong. There's blood, there are tears, and a sense of finality, as if something terrible is about to happen. Richard was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was laden with emotion. You're seeing her memories, Isabella's memories. But how is that possible? I never knew her, never touched anything that could carry her essence. Perhaps, Richard said, turning to face her, because you are her. Reborn, reincarnated, sent back to torment or save me. I still don't know which. Arya felt a chill run down her spine. That's impossible. Is it? Look at me and tell me you don't feel anything, that there isn't a part of you that recognizes me, that knows who I am even before I introduce myself. Arya couldn't deny it. From the moment she had seen him, she had felt that inexplicable connection, as if they were two halves of a whole separated by cruel circumstances. Tell me about Isabella, she whispered. Tell me the truth. Richard stood up, walking to the fountain. The water ran gently, creating a relaxing sound that contrasted with the tension of the moment. Isabella arrived at the palace 5 years ago. She was like you, a veil-bearer, sent to help me with problems similar to those I have now. He paused, running his hands through his hair. But she wasn't just a healer. She was everything. Intelligent, brave, beautiful. And for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to love someone. What happened to her? Arya asked, though she was afraid of the answer. She died. Because of me. Because of my fault. Richard's voice was little more than a whisper. And since then I've lived in the hell of remembering every moment we spent together, every word we exchanged, every touch we shared. Arya stood up, approaching him. She could feel the pain radiating from his body like waves of heat. Let me help you, that's why I'm here. Richard turned to her, and Arya saw unshed tears in his eyes. You don't understand. I can't be touched. I can't be cured, because the pain is all I have left of her. That's not true, Arya said, extending her hand. Pain is not love, it's just pain. No! Richard backed away, his voice echoing through the garden. Don't touch me. You don't know what might happen. I know exactly what might happen, Arya replied, keeping her hand extended. I can absorb your pain, your guilt, your nightmares. I can free you and destroy yourself in the process like Isabella was destroyed. Then tell me how she died. Tell me the truth, so I can understand the risks. Richard stared at her for a long moment, struggling with himself. Finally he sighed deeply. Very well, but not here. Come with me. He led her through the garden, passing rosebeds that perfumed the night air. They arrived at a more secluded part of the palace, where there was a white marble pavilion ornamented with carved columns. In the center, there was a low table with cushions around it. Sit, Richard said, settling on one of the cushions. I'm going to tell you a story. A story about love, betrayal, and death. Arya sat across from him, crossing her legs. The moonlight filtered through the columns, creating interesting patterns on the marble floor. There was something intimate about that environment, something that made her heart beat faster. When Isabella arrived at the palace, I was going through a crisis similar to the current one. Nightmares, visions, episodes of uncontrollable anger. My advisors feared I was losing my sanity, and some even whispered about the possibility of deposition. Richard paused, his eyes lost in memories. Isabella was different from all the other bearers I had known. She wasn't afraid of me, didn't automatically submit to my authority. She challenged me, confronted me, made me question things I had accepted as absolute truths. You fell in love, Arya said, not as a question, but as a statement. Yes, madly, desperately. But our love was forbidden. I was the king, promised to a princess from a neighboring kingdom to seal a political alliance. Isabella was a veil-bearer, whose purity was considered sacred. But that didn't stop you, Arya observed. No. We met. In secret, in this very pavilion, in the private gardens, in hidden chambers of the palace. Each moment together was stolen, precious, intense. Arya could feel the passion in his voice even after all those years. And then? Then my younger brother, Peter, discovered our relationship. He had always been jealous of me, of my power, of my birthright. He saw our passion as an opportunity to destroy me. What did he do? He blackmailed Isabella, said he would reveal our secret to the council and the people, that this would cause a civil war, that I would be deposed and probably executed. He offered her a choice: leave the palace and never return or see my destruction. Arya felt a pang of pain in her chest, and she chose to leave. No, she chose to tell me the truth. We came here, to this very pavilion, and she told me everything. I was furious, not with her, but with Peter. I decided to confront him, force him to withdraw his threats. And did you confront him? Richard's voice became almost inaudible. Yes, but it wasn't a confrontation. It was a fight. Peter tried to attack me with a dagger, saying that if he couldn't defeat me politically, he would destroy me physically. We fought, and I killed him. Arya swallowed hard. You killed your own brother. In self-defense, but that doesn't lessen the weight of what I did. Peter was my blood brother, and I took his life. And Isabella? Isabella was present when it happened. She saw everything, and at that moment, something inside her died. She looked at me with horror, with disgust, as if I were a monster. She left you? Worse, she tried to heal me, tried to absorb my guilt, my pain, my despair, but the emotional burden was too intense, too toxic. Her body couldn't bear it. Arya felt tears streaming down her face. She died trying to save you. Died in my arms, whispering that she loved me. And since then, I've lived with the guilt of having killed the two people I loved most in the world. Thameen remained silent for a long moment, the weight of the tragedy hanging over them like a cloud. Arya could feel Richard's pain as a physical presence, dense and suffocating. Now do you understand why you can't touch me? Richard finally asked. Why I can't risk the same thing happening to you? I understand, Arya responded softly. But I also understand that your pain isn't just for their deaths. It's for the loneliness, for the isolation, for the refusal to allow yourself to be loved again. I don't deserve to be loved, Richard said bitterly. I'm a murderer, a man who destroyed everything he touched. No, Arya said, standing up. You're a man who made mistakes, who made difficult decisions in impossible situations, but that doesn't make you unworthy of love or redemption. She approached him, ignoring the panic in his eyes. I can feel your pain, Richard. I can feel it even without touching you. It's like a weight on my heart, even from a distance. Stay back, he said, his voice tense. You don't know what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing, Arya replied, kneeling in front of him. I'm choosing to trust you as Isabella did. I'm choosing to see the man you really are, not the monster you think you've become. Arya, let me help you, she whispered, extending her hand. Let me share your pain. And if you die like she died, then at least I'll die trying to save the man that... She stopped, realizing what she was about to say. What she felt for Richard was love. Was it possible to love someone she had just met? Or did those feelings come from somewhere else, from another life, from another soul? The man that what? Richard asked, his voice hoarse. The man my heart recognizes, she said honestly. I don't know if these feelings are mine or Isabella's. I don't know if it's me or her speaking now, but I know I can't see you suffering like this. Richard stared at her for a long moment. You're too brave for your own good, he finally said. Or maybe you're more deserving of courage than you think? Slowly, hesitantly, Richard extended his hand toward hers. If we do this, there's no going back. Once we touch, we're bound forever. I understand, Arya said, keeping her hand extended. And if something goes wrong, then we'll face it together. Their fingers touched and the world exploded in light and sensation. Arya felt an electric current run through her body, as if every cell was being rewritten. She could feel everything Richard felt, his pain, his guilt, his despair, but also his love, his passion, his desperate need for connection. But there was something else. Another presence, another consciousness mixed with the experience. Isabella. Arya could feel her, could hear her voice whispering words of love and forgiveness. I love you. The words left Arya's lips, but she didn't know if they were hers or Isabella's. I've always loved you, I'll always love you. Richard pulled her closer, his arms closing around her. Isabella, he whispered, and then, with more force, Arya. They kissed, and it was as if the universe was aligning again. Everything that had been broken was being repaired. Everything that had been lost was being found. Arya could feel Richard's pain being absorbed by her, but unlike what had happened with Isabella, she didn't feel overwhelmed. It was as if she was strong enough to carry both her own essence and Isabella's. When they separated, both were breathless. Richard touched her face with an almost religious reverence. You're real, he whispered. You're really here. I am, Arya confirmed, covering his hand with hers, and I'm not going anywhere. Promise? Promise. They spent the rest of the night talking, touching each other carefully, exploring this new connection that had formed between them. Arya told him about her life at the temple, about the years of solitude and preparation. Richard talked about the nightmares that tormented him, about the guilt he carried. When the sun began to rise, painting the sky pink and gold, they were still together in the pavilion, wrapped in each other's arms. Arya felt complete in a way she had never experienced before. It was as if she had found the part of herself she didn't even know was missing. What happens now? She asked, tracing patterns on his bare chest. Now, Richard said, kissing the top of her head, we face the world together. It won't be easy. There will be people who will oppose our love, who will try to separate us. Let them try, Arya replied with a determination that surprised her. I'm not the same person who arrived yesterday. I'm stronger now. Yes, Richard agreed, holding her tight against him. We are. But even as they talked about the future, they both knew that the real challenges were just beginning, because their love had awakened forces that had been dormant for a long time, and not everyone in the palace would be happy to see the king find peace again. In the shadows of the palace, eyes watched and ears listened, and plans were already being made to ensure that the story of Isabella and Richard wouldn't repeat itself, at least not with a happy ending. The first. Rays of sun that infiltrated the pavilion brought with them more than light. They brought reality. Arya awakened in Richard's arms, feeling for the first time in her life the warmth of another body against hers. But along with this sense of completeness came something more disturbing. She could feel thoughts that weren't hers, emotions that seemed to come from another person. Isabella, she whispered, touching her own chest. The presence was subtle but undeniable. It was as if the soul of the ancient veil-bearer had found a home in her body, as if they were sharing not just memories, but the very essence. Richard opened his eyes at the sound of the name. You feel her, don't you? Yes, Arya admitted, turning to face him. She's here inside me. I can hear her thoughts, feel her emotions. It's as if we were three people in this relationship. Does that bother you? Arya considered the question carefully. No, actually, it's comforting, as if she were guiding me, protecting me, showing me things I need to know. What kind of things? Before Arya could answer, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the garden. Richard immediately went on alert, covering Arya with his tunic. Someone's coming, he murmured. Commander Harris appeared at the entrance of the pavilion, breathless and clearly disturbed. Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion, but there's an urgent situation at the palace. What situation? Richard asked, helping Arya to her feet. The Grand Vizier Marcus has called an emergency meeting of the council. He's questioning your sanity, Your Majesty. He's saying that the presence of the veil-bearer has made you more unstable, not less. Arya felt a chill in her stomach. Marcus, she had heard that name before. In Isabella's memories, he was an ambitious man always looking for ways to increase his power and influence in the palace. What evidence does he have? Richard asked, his voice cold as ice. He's alleging that you spent the entire night away from your chambers, that you were seen in intimate conversations with the bearer, that... Harris hesitated, looking at Arya. That there were improper activities. Improper activities, Richard repeated, his tone dangerous. And how exactly did Marcus obtain this information? He has spies, Your Majesty. He always has. Servants loyal to him, guards who owe him favors. He knows about the time you spent together. Arya touched Richard's arm, feeling the anger growing inside him. Calm, she whispered. Don't let him provoke you into doing something hasty. She's right, Harris agreed. Marcus is waiting for a violent reaction. He wants you to demonstrate instability in front of the council. Then I won't give him that satisfaction, Richard said, though Arya could feel the effort it cost him. I'll dress and attend the meeting. Arya, you should return to your chambers and... No, she interrupted. I won't hide, if he wants to. Use me as evidence of your supposed instability. Let him confront me face to face. Arya, it's dangerous. Marcus is a man without scruples. He won't hesitate to hurt you if it serves his purposes. Then let me go with you, she insisted. Let me speak for myself. Richard stared at her for a long moment. Are you sure? Once you enter that room, there's no turning back. They'll see you as my consort, as someone who influences my decisions. Good, Arya replied with a determination that surprised her, because that's exactly what I am. An hour later, Arya found herself dressed in her most elaborate ceremonial robes, walking through the palace corridors beside Richard. She could feel the gazes of the servants and guards, some curious, others hostile. Word of what had happened between them had already spread. Remember, Richard whispered as they approached the council chamber, Marcus will try to provoke you. He wants you to lose control, to demonstrate that you're a bad influence on me. I understand, Arya replied, but there's something you should know. Through Isabella's memories, I know things about Marcus, secrets he would prefer to keep buried. Richard stopped abruptly. What kind of secrets? Isabella discovered that he was diverting funds from the royal treasury. She had proof, documents that showed his illicit transactions. He tried to blackmail her to keep her quiet. Why did she never tell me? Because she planned to tell you. On the night your brother confronted her, she was planning to reveal everything to you. Marcus was desperate to prevent that from happening. Are you saying Marcus was involved in Isabella's death? Not directly, but he certainly benefited from the situation, with Isabella dead and you consumed. By guilt, he could consolidate his power without obstacles. The revelation left Richard visibly shaken. So he is partially responsible for everything that happened. Yes, and now he's trying to do the same thing to me. They reached the large doors of the council chamber. 2 guards opened them, revealing a solemn and intimidating environment. The room was circular, with marble columns that rose to the domed ceiling. Around a crescent-shaped table sat the council members, mostly elderly men, dressed in elaborate clothes that demonstrated their position and wealth. In the center of the table, standing, was Marcus. He was a tall, thin man with a carefully trimmed graying beard and eyes that seemed to calculate every movement. When he saw Arya enter with Richard, his eyes narrowed. Your Majesty, he said, bowing slightly. How good of you to finally honor us with your presence. Marcus, Richard replied coldly, I understand you have concerns about my mental condition. Not just me, Your Majesty. All of us are concerned. Your behavior has been erratic. Erratic? Disappearing for entire nights, neglecting your royal duties, and now, he gestured toward Arya, bringing a stranger to our most private meetings. This stranger is a highly trained veil-bearer, sent by the Temple of the Celestial Gaze. To assist me, Richard said, his voice controlled but with an undercurrent of anger. Assist with what exactly? Marcus asked, a malicious smile on his lips. Because from the reports I receive, she has been more of a distraction than a cure. Arya felt Richard's anger grow, but she also felt something else, Isabella's presence intensifying inside her. It was as if the ancient bearer's soul was preparing for battle. "I can speak for myself," Arya said, stepping forward. "I don't need anyone to defend me." "Ah, yes," Marcus said, turning to her, "the mysterious veil-bearer. Tell us, young lady, what miracles have you performed since you arrived at our palace?" "I have performed the only miracle that matters," Arya replied calmly. "I have brought peace to the troubled mind of your king." "Peace?" Marcus laughed. "Or have you just replaced one obsession with another?" "Be careful, Marcus," Richard warned, his voice low and dangerous. "No, it's all right," Arya said, lightly touching Richard's arm. "Let me answer." She turned to Marcus, and when she spoke, there was an authority in her voice that wasn't there before. "You speak of obsession, Grand Vizier, but I wonder, what obsessions do you suffer from?" Marcus seemed genuinely surprised. "I don't understand what you mean." "You don't understand? Then perhaps I can clarify. You're obsessed with power, with control, so much so that you're willing to sabotage your own king's mental health to maintain it." "That's ridiculous," Marcus protested, but Arya could see nervousness in his eyes. "Is it? Then explain this." Arya approached the table, placing her hands on its polished surface. "5 years ago, when the bearer Isabella was here, you tried to blackmail her to keep quiet about certain financial irregularities." The silence in the room was deafening. Marcus visibly paled. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You don't? Then perhaps you can explain why there's a discrepancy of 50,000 gold coins in the royal treasury records from the year Isabella died." "How could you know?" Marcus began, then stopped, realizing he was incriminating himself. "How could—" "I know," Arya repeated, a cold smile on her lips. "Because Isabella told me, because she showed me where you hid the documents that prove your theft." "That's impossible," Marcus said, but his voice was trembling. "Isabella has been dead for 5 years." "Yes, she has. But her soul didn't rest. She remained here, in the palace, waiting for justice. And now, finally, she will have it." Richard looked at Arya with amazement. "Do you really know where the documents are?" "I do," Arya confirmed, never taking her eyes off Marcus. "Isabella showed me. They're hidden in your own library, Grand Vizier, behind a bookshelf about ancient history." Marcus backed away, his face now completely pale. You can't prove anything." "We can't?" Richard asked, his voice now cold as ice. "Guard, escort Grand Vizier Marcus to his chambers. I want his library searched immediately." "No!" Marcus shouted, trying to escape, but the guards were already upon him. "You don't understand. I was trying to protect the kingdom. Richard was unstable. He couldn't govern properly. So you stole from the royal treasury and let me carry the guilt for Isabella's death?" Richard asked, approaching Marcus. "You allowed me to live 5 years in hell, believing I was a monster, when in fact you were the real villain." I didn't know she would die," Marcus stammered. "I just wanted her to keep quiet." "But you knew she was planning to tell me about your thefts. You knew she had proof against you. So what did you do?" "Told my brother about our relationship, knowing he would react violently. I... Marcus couldn't form a coherent response. "Take him away," Richard ordered, his voice tired. "Imprison him until we can decide his fate." As Marcus was dragged out of the room shouting protests and threats, the other council members remained in shocked silence. Finally, an elderly man with a long white beard stood up. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing respectfully, "on behalf of the council, I apologize for having doubted your sanity. It is clear that you were being manipulated by forces we didn't know." "Thank you, Councillor Joseph," Richard replied. "But the truth is that I wasn't at my best mentally. The difference is that now I have someone who helps me maintain balance." He turned to Arya, extending his hand. "I would like to officially introduce the veil-bearer Arya. She has not only helped me find mental peace, but has also brought justice for crimes that have been buried for a long time." Arya took his hand, feeling the strength and affection in his touch. "It is an honor to serve the kingdom," she said to the council. The honor is ours, Joseph replied. But now we have practical matters to consider. With Marcus removed from his position, we need a new Grand Vizier. Yes, Richard agreed, but that can wait. First, I want all financial records reviewed. I want to know exactly how much Marcus stole and where that money went. It will be done, Your Majesty, Joseph promised. When the meeting finally ended, Arya and Richard walked together through the palace corridors. She could feel a change in him. Part of the tension he had carried for years had dissipated. Not completely, but enough that she could see the man he really was beneath all the layers of pain and guilt. "How did you know about the documents?" he asked when they were far from curious ears. "Isabella showed me," Arya replied simply. She was much more aware of what was happening around her than anyone realized. She knew Marcus was stealing, knew he was desperate to keep it secret. "And you can talk to her?" "Not exactly talk. It's more like sharing consciousness. Sometimes she shows me things, sometimes I feel her emotions. It's as if we're merged but maintaining our separate identities." "Doesn't that scare you?" "Should it? I don't know. It's something I've never heard of before. One soul sharing, a body with another." Arya smiled. "Maybe it's because there's never been a situation like ours before. Maybe Isabella remained here because of her love for you, waiting for a chance to finish what she started. And you? How do you feel about all this?" "Honestly, I feel privileged. Isabella was an extraordinary woman, brave and intelligent. Having access to her memories, to her wisdom, is a gift. Even knowing she loved me first." Arya touched his face gently. "Richard, I think our love, mine for you, is a continuation of hers. We are all connected by something greater than ourselves." They were interrupted by the arrival of a guard. "Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but we found the documents in Marcus's library. There are entire boxes of evidence." "Excellent," Richard replied. "Take everything to my office. I'll review it personally." "Yes, Your Majesty. There is also an urgent message from Princess Sarah of Jefferson. She says she needs to speak with you about personal matters." Arya felt a chill in her stomach. Sarah, she knew that name from Isabella's memories. She was the princess to whom Richard had been promised in marriage, the political alliance he had neglected because of his love for Isabella. "Tell Princess Sarah I will receive her tomorrow," Richard said, but Arya could feel the tension in his voice. When the guard left, Arya touched Richard's arm. "Are you still promised to her?" "Technically, yes," he admitted. "But that will change. I can't marry her, not after finding you." "Richard, you can't just break an agreement of that kind. It could cause a war." "Then let there be war," he said fiercely. "I won't live a lie. I won't marry someone I don't love." "There are other ways," Arya said thoughtfully. "Perhaps we can find a solution that benefits everyone." "What kind of solution?" "I don't know yet. But Isabella whispers to me that there are secrets about Princess Sarah that might be useful." "What kind of secrets?" "She has a lover, a captain of her father's guard. They've loved each other for years, but they can't be together because of the marriage agreement with you." Richard stared at her with surprise. How could Isabella know that? She had a network of informants, people who owed her favors. She knew many things that happened in the neighboring kingdoms. "So you're suggesting that—" "I'm suggesting that perhaps we can find a way to release both of you from a marriage neither of you wants." Richard pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply. "You're amazing," he murmured against her lips. "Intelligent, brave, compassionate. How was I lucky enough to find you?" "Perhaps," Arya whispered back. "Luck has nothing to do with it." That night they retired to Richard's private chambers. It was the first time Arya had been in his personal quarters, and she was impressed by the simplicity of the place. She had expected opulence, but found an almost Spartan environment with few pieces of furniture and minimal decoration. "Not what you expected?" Richard asked, noticing her expression. "No, it's very simple. After Isabella died, I couldn't tolerate unnecessary luxury anymore. It seemed futile, empty." Arya walked around the room, gently touching the few objects that were displayed. An ornate dagger, some books, a small painting of a desert landscape. "And now?" "Now," he said, approaching from behind, "I feel that perhaps I can begin to live again." He wrapped her in his arms, and Arya leaned against him, feeling safe and loved. But there was something else, a sense of presence that she was beginning to recognize. "She's here," she whispered. "Isabella." "Yes, she's happy, satisfied, as if she could finally rest." "Is she ready to leave?" Arya closed her eyes, focusing on the subtle presence. "Not yet. She wants to make sure you're truly healed, that you won't go back to blaming yourself for what happened." "And you? Will you be sad when she leaves?" "Maybe. But I'll also be grateful. She gave me you, showed me how to love you." Richard turned her in his arms, looking deeply into her eyes. "Arya, I need you to know something. What I feel for you is not just an extension of what I felt for Isabella. You are unique, special in your own right." "I know," she replied, touching his face. "And what I feel for you is also real, completely my own." They kissed again, and this time there was a promise in the kiss, a promise of future, of challenges faced together, of love that transcended even death. But in the corridors of the palace, in the shadows where conspirators gathered, other plans were being made. Marcus's fall had left a power vacuum that others were eager to fill, and not everyone saw the love between Richard and Arya as something to be celebrated. The real battle was just beginning. Morning arrived with a palpable tension in the air. Arya awoke in Richard's arms, but this time there was something different. Isabella's presence was more intense, almost urgent, as if she were trying to communicate something important. Fragmented images passed through Arya's mind. A blonde woman with blue eyes, tears, a letter being hastily written, knights in golden armor. "Sarah," she whispered, and Richard immediately opened his eyes. "What is it?" he asked, noticing the concern in her voice. "Isabella is showing me things about Princess Sarah. She's not coming here just to discuss the marriage." "There's something else." Richard sat up in bed, fully alert. "What kind of thing?" "She's running away. There are problems in her kingdom, something related to the captain of the guard she loves. He's been discovered, and now she needs protection." "How could Isabella know this?" "I'm not sure, but the images are very clear. Sarah is desperate, and she's coming here not to claim you as her husband, but to beg for help." Richard got up, walking to the window. Outside, the sun was already high, and he could see movement in the main courtyard of the palace. "If she's running away, it means her pursuers might be after her. This could bring war to our kingdom." "Or," Arya said, approaching him, "it could be an opportunity. If we help Sarah, if we offer protection to her and the man she loves, perhaps we can dissolve the marriage agreement honorably." "Are you suggesting that I defy the kingdom of Jefferson?" "I'm suggesting that you be the just man I know you are. Sarah is a victim of circumstances, just as you were. She deserves the chance to choose her own destiny." Richard looked at her with admiration. "You always find a way to see the best in people, don't you? Isabella taught me that. She saw goodness where others saw only political interest." A sound of trumpets echoed through the palace, announcing the arrival of important visitors. Richard sighed deeply. "She's arrived. Are you ready to meet her?" "I am. But there's something I need to tell you first." Arya touched his arm. "Isabella showed me that Sarah knows about her. Sarah knew about your love and secretly was relieved. She never wanted to marry you." "Then why did she never say anything?" "Because she had no choice. Just as you didn't, just as I didn't when I was summoned. Here, we're all pieces in a larger game, but now we have the chance to change the rules." They dressed quickly, Arya choosing a dark blue tunic that enhanced her eyes, and Richard opting for his formal state robes. When they were ready, they walked together through the palace corridors, and Arya could feel the curiosity and nervousness of the servants who watched them. "Remember," Richard said as they approached the main hall, "Sarah may appear fragile, but she is politically astute. She's been educated to be queen since childhood." "I understand, but also remember that she's a woman who loves someone she can't have." That creates a bond between us. The doors of the hall opened, revealing an impressive scene. Princess Sarah was in the center of the room, surrounded by her personal guards. She was exactly as Arya had seen in Isabella's visions: hair golden as gold, eyes blue as the desert sky, and a beauty that was both delicate and strong. But there was something else Arya hadn't expected: barely disguised despair. "Your Majesty," Sarah said, curtsying gracefully when Richard approached. "Thank you for receiving me in such unusual circumstances." "Princess Sarah," Richard replied, inclining his head respectfully. "You will always be welcome in my palace. I would like to introduce the veil-bearer Arya." Sarah turned to Arya, and for a moment their eyes met. Arya felt an instant connection, as if recognizing a kindred spirit. "It is an honor to meet you," Sarah said, and there was genuine sincerity in her voice. "The honor is mine, Your Highness," Arya replied, curtsying. "Perhaps we could speak in private," Sarah said, looking between Richard and Arya. "There are matters we need to discuss away from curious ears." Richard gestured toward a smaller room adjacent to the main hall. "Of course, let's go." When the three were settled in the private room, Sarah finally allowed her composure to break. Tears began to run down her face, and she covered her face with her hands. "Forgive me," she sobbed. "I tried to maintain dignity, but I can't anymore." Arya immediately approached, offering a handkerchief. "You don't need to apologize. We're here to help." "You don't even know what happened," Sarah said, accepting the handkerchief. "You don't know what disaster I've brought to you." "Then tell us," Richard said gently, "what happened in Jefferson?" Sarah took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. "My father discovered about Daniel, the captain of the guard with whom I'm in love. Someone betrayed us, said we were planning to run away together." "And was it true?" Arya asked. "Yes," Sarah admitted. "We couldn't live the lie anymore. We decided to leave, to find a place where we could be together. But before we could execute our plan, we were discovered." "What did your father do?" Richard asked, though from his tone Arya realized he already feared the answer. "He ordered Daniel's execution, said a commoner who dared to touch a princess deserved death. I begged, I knelt, I offered anything in exchange for his life, but my father was determined." "And Daniel?" "He escaped. Some of the guards who were loyal to him helped him flee, but my father sent men after him, and they're still hunting." Sarah looked directly at Richard. "I came here hoping you could help us, that you could offer sanctuary to Daniel." "Sarah," Richard said carefully, "you understand this would be an act of war against your father." "I understand, but I also understand that you, more than anyone, know what it's like to love someone you can't have." She looked at Arya. "Or at least, you did." "That's true," Richard admitted, "but the situation is complicated. By offering sanctuary to a fugitive from Jefferson, I would be violating ancient treaties." "I know," Sarah said, tears returning to her eyes. "I know it's a lot to ask, but I have no one else to turn to." Arya felt a sudden impulse, an urgency she knew came from Isabella. "There's another solution," she said suddenly. Both turned to her. "What solution?" Richard asked. "What if it wasn't just a matter of offering sanctuary? What if it was a matter of justice?" "I don't understand," Sarah said. "Your father is violating the ancient laws of hospitality. Daniel served faithfully as captain of the guard, and for that he deserves protection, not persecution. If Richard could prove that your father is acting unjustly, he could legitimately intervene," Richard finished, understanding where she wanted to go. "But that would still mean conflict with Jefferson." "Not necessarily," Arya said, ideas flowing through her, some her own, others clearly coming from Isabella. "What if we offered a deal? Richard protects Daniel and cancels the engagement with Sarah, but in return offers a different alliance. A trade alliance, perhaps, or a promise of mutual protection." "My father would never accept," Sarah said. "He's determined to see me married to Richard." "But what if he had no choice?" Arya asked. "What if there were circumstances that made the marriage impossible?" "What circumstances?" Richard asked. "What if Richard was already married?" The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah looked between Richard and Arya, understanding slowly forming on her face. "Are you suggesting that—" Richard began. "I'm suggesting that perhaps it's time to make our union official," Arya said, surprising herself with her own courage. "If we're married, the agreement with Jefferson becomes automatically null." "But that would be a scandal," Sarah said. "A king marrying a veil-bearer." "It would be unusual," Arya agreed, "but not without precedent. And if we explain the circumstances, if we show that our love is true and that it can benefit both kingdoms." "Are you willing to do this?" Richard asked, his voice full of emotion. "Are you willing to marry me, knowing it might bring political difficulties?" "I'm willing to marry you because I love you," Arya replied firmly. "We'll face the political difficulties together." Sarah suddenly smiled through her tears. "You're perfect for each other," she said. "I can see the love between you. It's exactly like what I feel for Daniel." "So you would support our plan?" Richard asked. "Support it? I would help you execute it. If it means I can be with Daniel, I'll do anything." "There's just one problem," Richard said. "Daniel is still being hunted. We need to find him first." "I know where he is," Sarah said quickly. "He's hiding in the northern mountains, in a cave we've known since childhood, but my father's men are getting closer." "Then we have no time to lose," Arya said. "We need to act quickly." "No," Richard said firmly. "I need to act quickly. You two will stay here, safe." "Absolutely not," Arya protested. "I won't let you face this alone." "She's right," Sarah agreed. "Besides, you need me. I know the way, I know the hiding places. Without me, you may never find Daniel." Richard looked between the two women, clearly struggling with the decision. "It's too dangerous. If something goes wrong—" "Then we'll face it together," Arya said, touching his hand. "Together we're stronger." "Does Isabella think so too?" he asked. Arya closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the familiar presence. "She says it's time to stop trying to protect the people you love by keeping them away from danger. She says it's time to trust them to fight by your side." Richard sighed deeply. "Very well, but we'll do this my way. We'll take guards, weapons, and at the first sign of danger, you'll retreat." "Understood." "Understood," Arya and Sarah said in unison. "When do we leave?" Sarah asked. "Now," Richard replied. "Every minute we wait is another minute that your father's men have to find Daniel." The next hours passed in a blur of preparations. Arya exchanged her ceremonial robes for more practical travel clothes, while Richard gathered a small group of his most trusted guards. Sarah, meanwhile, wrote a letter to her father, explaining her actions and asking for understanding. "Are you sure about this?" Arya asked as they prepared to leave. "About what? About marrying you or about defying an entire kingdom?" Richard asked with a smile. "Both. About marrying you, I'm absolutely sure. About defying an entire kingdom." He paused. "Well, Isabella did that for me once. I guess it's my turn to do it for someone." They left the palace at noon, a small group of 8 people. Richard, Arya, Sarah, and 5 guards. Sarah had changed her princely clothes for travel attire, and from a distance she could easily be mistaken for a common merchant. The journey to the northern mountains would take 2 hours on horseback. As they rode, Arya couldn't help but notice how Sarah transformed as they moved away from the palace. The formal princess disappeared, replaced by a determined and brave woman. "Tell me about Daniel," Arya said when they stopped to rest the horses. He's everything I've ever wanted in a man," Sarah replied, her eyes shining. "Intelligent, brave, kind. He sees me as a person, not as a political property." "How did you meet?" "He came to the palace when I was 16. He was young for a captain of the guard, but had distinguished himself in several battles. My father appointed him to lead my personal protection." "And you fell in love?" "Not immediately. It took time. He was very respectful, very careful not to cross boundaries. But I could see the way he looked at me, and I felt something I had never felt before." "And when did you know you were in love?" Sarah smiled, a dreamy expression on her face. "There's a garden in our palace, a place where I used to go to meditate. One night I was there, crying because I had received a letter from your father, talking about the marriage preparations. Daniel found me, and when he saw me crying, he could no longer maintain distance. He comforted me, and then... You kissed, Arya finished. Yes. And at that moment we knew there was no going back. We tried to resist, tried to keep our distance, but it was impossible. Love was stronger than our reason. I understand, Arya said, looking at Richard, who was checking the equipment with the guards. Completely. You went through this too, didn't you? This struggle between duty and heart. Yes, but we were lucky. We found a way to reconcile the two. I hope we can do the same, Sarah said. I hope it's not too late. When they resumed the journey, Arya noticed that the mountains became steeper and rockier. The vegetation changed too, becoming more sparse and hardy. It was a wild and beautiful landscape, but also dangerous. How much further? Richard asked Sarah. We're close, she replied. The cave is just past that rock formation. She pointed to a set of rocks that rose like natural towers. It was then that they heard the screams. Daniel! Sarah shouted, spurring her horse toward the sound. Richard and Arya followed her, with the guards close behind. When they reached the clearing near the rock formation, they found a scene that made Arya's heart tighten. Daniel, a tall, strong man with brown hair and green eyes, was cornered against a rock wall, surrounded by 6 armed men, clearly the hunters sent by Sarah's father. Surrender! Richard shouted, unsheathing his sword. You are in Westeria territory. The hunters turned, surprised by the unexpected arrival. The leader, a burly man with a scar on his face, laughed disdainfully. King Richard, he said, what a coincidence. We just came to fetch a fugitive. Don't interfere in our affairs. This man is under my protection, Richard declared. Any action against him will be considered an act of war. Your protection? The leader asked, clearly confused. But Princess Sarah is your fiancée. Why would you protect her lover? Because, Sarah said, dismounting and walking bravely to the center of the clearing, I asked him to, and because he understands what true love is. Princess, Daniel shouted, you shouldn't have come. I wasn't going to let you face this. Alone, she replied, echoing the words Arya had said to Richard. Enough talk, the leader of the hunters said, raising his sword. We're going to take the fugitive, with or without your permission. No, Richard said, positioning himself between the hunters and Daniel. You won't. What followed was a brief but intense battle. Richard's guards were skilled, but Jefferson's hunters were experienced warriors. Arya watched, her heart in her throat as Richard fought with deadly grace, his sword dancing in the air. It was then that she felt Isabella's presence intensify dramatically. It wasn't a subtle sensation this time. It was as if Isabella were trying to take control of her body. Arya felt her hands move of their own volition, extending toward the battle. Suddenly, a golden light sprouted from her palms, enveloping all the combatants. For a moment everyone stopped, looking at the source of the light with admiration and fear. Stop! The voice that came from Arya's mouth wasn't entirely her own. It was as if 2 voices were speaking in unison. Enough bloodshed! Enough hatred! Chatin. Light intensified, and Arya felt power running through her body. Not just her own power as a veil-bearer, but Isabella's residual power as well. It was intoxicating and terrifying at the same time. You will return to Jefferson, she said, her voice echoing strangely. You will tell the king that his daughter has chosen her own destiny, as is her right. You will say that love cannot be hunted or captured. The hunters, clearly disturbed by the supernatural manifestation, began to back away. Witchcraft, one of them murmured. No, Arya, Isabella replied. Justice. The leader of the hunters looked between Arya and Richard, clearly calculating his options. Finally, he lowered his sword. This doesn't end here, he said. The King of Jefferson won't forget this offense. Neither will I, Richard replied calmly. Tell him I'll be awaiting his response. When the hunters left, the golden light finally dissipated, and Arya felt her strength drain away. Richard caught her when she stumbled, his concern clear in his eyes. Are you all right? He asked. I think so, she replied, still feeling echoes of the power she had channeled. Isabella helped me. She lent her strength. Thank you, Sarah said, approaching with Daniel. You saved our lives. Daniel bowed deeply. Your Majesty, I have no words to express my gratitude. You don't need to, Richard replied. Everyone deserves the chance to choose their own destiny. What do we do now? Sarah asked. Now, Richard said, looking at Arya, we return to the palace and plan a wedding. 2 weddings, actually. 2? Arya asked. Yes, ours and yours, he said, looking at Sarah and Daniel. If you want. More than anything, Sarah said, tears of joy running down her face. But what will we say to my father? Daniel asked. Or to the King of Jefferson? We'll tell the truth, Arya replied, feeling stronger with each moment. We'll say that love defeated politics, that justice prevailed over tradition. And if they don't accept, Sarah asked, then we'll face the consequences together, Richard said. But for now, let's celebrate. Let's celebrate love, freedom, and courage. As they rode back to the palace, now with Daniel among them, Arya felt a change in Isabella's presence. It was as if the ancient veil-bearer was finally at peace, as if her unfulfilled mission was finally being completed. Thank you, she whispered silently, and could swear she heard an echo of joyful laughter in response. The sun was beginning to set when they sighted the palace towers, painting the sky gold and crimson. It was an omen that changes were coming, but for the first time since she had arrived in Westeria, Arya wasn't afraid of the future. She had love, she had purpose, and she had the blessing of a soul that had finally found peace. What more could she ask for? But deep in her mind she knew that the real challenges were yet to come. The King of Jefferson would not easily accept the loss of his daughter and his promised son-in-law, and others in the palace of Westeria might see the power she had demonstrated as a threat. The battle for the right to love may have been won, but the war for freedom was just beginning. Preparations for the double wedding began as soon as they returned to the palace, but the joy of the occasion was quickly overshadowed by alarming news. 3 days after Daniel's rescue, a messenger arrived at the palace with a letter sealed with the royal seal of Jefferson. The parchment carried with it an aroma of threat that Arya could feel even before Richard broke the seal. What does it say? She asked, watching Richard's face harden as he read. Nothing we didn't already expect, he replied, but his voice was tense. King Albert is furious. He considers our actions a declaration of war and is marching here with an army. Sarah, who was next to Daniel choosing fabrics for her wedding dress, paled. My father has always been a man of his word. If he said he's coming with an army, he will. How many men can he gather? Daniel asked, his military experience immediately triggered. 15,000, maybe 20,000, Sarah replied. He has alliances with neighboring kingdoms. They may see this as an opportunity to expand their territories. Our army has 10,000 men, Richard said, mentally calculating. We can resist for a time, but if he brings allies— No, Arya interrupted, a strange certainty taking hold of her. There will be no war. Arya, you don't understand the gravity of the situation, Richard said gently. He's coming to recover his daughter and punish those he considers traitors. I understand perfectly, she replied, and there was something in her voice that made everyone stop to listen to her. But Isabella is showing me things. There is another way. What kind of things? Sarah asked. Arya closed her eyes, allowing the visions to flow through her. I see King Albert. He's alone in his tent, away from his generals. He's crying. He doesn't want to do this. He loves you, Sarah, but feels betrayed. It's true, Sarah whispered. My father has always been a hard man, but he loves me. This must be breaking his heart. Then perhaps we can appeal to that love, Arya said, opening her eyes. Perhaps we can make him see that his daughter hasn't betrayed him, but only chosen happiness. How? Richard asked. Let me go to him, Arya said, and immediately everyone protested. Absolutely not, Richard said firmly. You will not put yourself in danger. She's right, Sarah said suddenly. My father is an honorable man. He wouldn't harm an emissary, especially a veil-bearer. Even so, it's too risky, Daniel argued. All important choices in life are risky, Arya replied. But Isabella is telling me it's the only way to avoid bloodshed. I will go with you, Sarah said. I'm his daughter. He will listen to me. No, Richard said categorically. If anyone has to go, it will be me. It's my responsibility as king. And if he decides to kill you on the spot? Arya asked. No, it has to be me. I have abilities that can protect me, and I have Isabella with me. The discussion continued for hours, but in the end, Arya prevailed. It would be a delicate mission. She would go alone to King Albert's camp, carrying a peace proposal and hoping that a father's love for his daughter would be stronger than his wounded pride. That night, as Arya prepared for the mission, she and Richard spent long hours talking about the future. They were in the Rose Garden, the same place where they had first met, and the atmosphere was charged with emotion. If something goes wrong, Richard began, but Arya silenced him with a kiss. Nothing will go wrong, she said with a confidence she didn't know where it came from. Isabella assures me of this. You speak of her as if she were a separate person, Richard observed. But sometimes I get the impression that you are merging. Perhaps we are, Arya admitted. Each day that passes, it becomes harder to distinguish where my thoughts end and hers begin. But it doesn't frighten me. Actually, it gives me strength. And if one day you cease to be Arya completely? Impossible, she replied, touching his face. Because what I feel for you is completely mine. Isabella loved you, but in a different way. My love for you is unique. It's my own creation. They kissed under the moonlight, and Arya recorded every sensation in her memory. Tomorrow she would depart on a mission that could change the fate of 2 kingdoms. But at that moment, there were only she and Richard, and the love that united them. Morning came too soon. Arya donned her best ceremonial robes, a white tunic, with golden embroidery that marked her position as a veil-bearer. She carried with her the amulet that Kevin had given her, and a sealed letter with peace proposals. Remember, Richard said as she mounted her horse, if there's any sign of danger, you flee, promise me. I promise, she said, though she knew she wouldn't keep the promise if it meant leaving others in danger. The journey to King Albert's camp took 3 hours. Arya could see the smoke from the fires long before she sighted the tents. It was an impressive army, spread across a vast plain like a temporary city made of leather and steel. When she approached the sentinels, she was immediately surrounded by armed guards. I am the veil-bearer Arya, she announced. I come on a mission of peace to speak with King Albert. The guards exchanged uncertain looks. Clearly they hadn't expected anyone to come voluntarily to the camp. After a brief discussion, one of them left to take the message to the king. While she waited, Arya observed the camp. She could see soldiers sharpening weapons, horses being prepared for battle, and war machines being assembled. It was an impressive display of military power, but she could also sense something else, an underlying tension, as if many of these men weren't completely convinced of the righteousness of their cause. The king will receive you, the guard returned to announce, but you must leave any weapon here. I carry no weapons, Arya replied, only words of peace. She was escorted through the camp, feeling the curious and suspicious gazes of the soldiers. Finally, they reached the royal tent, an impressive structure in the center of the camp decorated with banners and guarded by elite warriors. The interior of the tent was luxurious but functional, with maps spread on a central table and weapons arranged on the walls. King Albert was standing near the entrance, and Arya immediately understood where Sarah had inherited her beauty. He was a tall, imposing man, with graying blonde hair and penetrating blue eyes. But there was something in his expression that confirmed Arya's visions. He was suffering. So you are the famous veil-bearer, he said, his voice deep and controlled. The woman who corrupted King Richard and stole my daughter. Your Majesty, Arya said, curtsying respectfully, I came here to speak the truth, not to exchange accusations. The truth? Albert laughed bitterly. The truth is that my daughter was seduced by a commoner, and that you helped facilitate this betrayal. The truth, Arya replied calmly, is that your daughter fell in love with an honorable and brave man, and that she was willing to sacrifice her own happiness to fulfill her duty, until she found an alternative. What alternative? Dishonor her family and break sacred agreements? The alternative of being happy without causing suffering to others, Arya said, stepping forward. Your Majesty, I can see in your eyes that you love Sarah. Can you see that forcing her to marry a man she doesn't love just to fulfill a political alliance is not an act of love? It's an act of necessity, Albert replied, but his voice had lost some of its strength. The kingdoms need alliances, stability, and those alliances can be built in other ways, Arya said, removing the letter she carried. Richard is not rejecting an alliance with Jefferson. He is proposing a different alliance, based on trade and mutual protection, not on forced marriage. Albert took the letter but didn't open it immediately. And my daughter? Will she be happy with this, Captain? She will be. I can guarantee that. How can you guarantee such a thing? Because I too fell in love with someone I shouldn't have loved, Arya replied honestly. I understand what this struggle between heart and duty is, and I can say that when we follow our heart, we find strengths we never knew we had. Albert finally opened the letter, reading it carefully. Arya could see different emotions passing across his face: anger, sadness, consideration. These are generous proposals, he finally admitted. But how can I trust a man who stole my daughter? He didn't steal your daughter, Arya said gently. He freed her, there's a difference. You speak as if I were a tyrant, Albert said, but there was no anger in his voice, only weariness. No, I speak as someone who recognizes a father who loves his daughter, but doesn't know how to express that love in a way that doesn't hurt her. For a long moment, they remained in silence. Finally, Albert moved to a chair, sitting heavily. You know I could order you arrested. You're in the middle of my army, completely at my mercy. I know, Arya replied calmly, but I also know you won't do that, because you're an honorable man and because... She hesitated, feeling Isabella encouraging her to continue. Because you've already lost a daughter once and you don't want to lose another. Albert raised his head abruptly. What did you say? Sarah is not your only daughter, Arya said softly. There was another, a long time ago. A daughter who died as a child because of a plague that devastated your region. How could you know that? Albert asked, his voice trembling. Isabella told me. She knew many things, had many informants. But what she showed me wasn't just the facts. She showed me your pain, your guilt for not having been able to save your first daughter. Tears began to form in Albert's eyes. Her name was Lily. She was only 5 years old when the plague took her. I could do nothing. And now you're trying to control everything in Sarah's life to ensure you don't lose her too, Arya said, approaching. But Your Majesty, protecting someone doesn't mean controlling their choices. It means supporting them when they make their own choices. You don't understand, Albert said, rising abruptly. Sarah is all I have left. If something happens to her, nothing will happen to her, Arya said firmly, because she will be surrounded by people who truly love her. Richard will protect her as if she were his own sister. Daniel would give his life for her. And I swear by all that is sacred that I will watch over her safety. Why would you do that? Why would you care about the well-being of a stranger? Because she is not a stranger, Arya replied. She is a woman who understands what it is to love against all odds. She is a sister in heart, even if not in blood. Albert studied her for a long moment. You really believe this can work? That my daughter can be happy? I believe it. But more importantly, Sarah believes it. And in the end, isn't that what matters? And if I accept these proposals, if I agree to this alternative alliance, then you will be remembered as a king who placed his daughter's well-being above his own pride, Arya replied. You will be remembered as a man who chose love over politics. And if I refuse, then there will be war, men will die, families will be destroyed, and in the end, Sarah will still be with Daniel, because true love always finds a way. Albert returned to the chair, placing his head in his hands. You place me in an impossible position. No, Arya said, kneeling in front of him. I'm offering an honorable way out. A way to maintain your dignity while allowing your daughter to be happy. You've mentioned Isabella several times, Albert said suddenly. Who was she? A woman. Who died trying to save the man she loved, Arya answered. A woman who understood that sometimes the greatest act of love is sacrifice. And she is with you now? Yes, she guides me, gives me strength, and she told me something very important to tell you. What? That Lily's death was not your fault, that you were a wonderful father to her, even if for a short time, and that she wouldn't want you to waste the love you have for Sarah trying to control her. Albert began to cry openly. You can really speak with the dead? I can hear those who have something important to say, Arya replied, and Lily has something to say. What? Arya closed her eyes, allowing Isabella's voice, and through her, something else to flow through her. She says she loves you, Daddy, that she's proud of the man you've become, and that she wants you to be happy, just as she wants Sarah to be happy. Lily, Albert whispered, as if he could see the lost child in front of him. She is at peace, Arya said softly, but she won't rest completely until you find peace too. They remained silent for several minutes, Albert processing everything he had heard. Finally, he stood up, walking to the table where Richard's letter was. These alliance proposals, he said, are they really serious? Completely, Arya replied. Richard is not trying to deceive you. He genuinely wants a lasting alliance with Jefferson, and my daughter, she really loves this captain, more than life itself. And he loves her, so much that he was willing to die for her. Albert nodded slowly. Then, perhaps it's time for me to stop fighting against fate. Does that mean you accept the proposals? It means I will consider them seriously, but there are conditions. What conditions? I want to meet this Daniel personally. I want to look into the eyes of the man who won my daughter's heart. That can be arranged. And I want the wedding to be celebrated in Jefferson with all the pomp and circumstance a princess deserves. I'm sure Sarah would be honored. And you, Albert said, looking directly at Arya, you must be my guest of honor. I want the woman who saved my daughter to be publicly recognized. It would be an honor, Arya replied, surprised. Then it is decided, Albert said, and for the first time since she had arrived, he smiled. I will send a messenger to Richard tomorrow with my official response, but you can tell him there will be no war. Thank you, Arya said, tears of relief running down her face. Thank you for choosing love. No, Albert replied, gently touching her shoulder. Thank you for reminding me of what really matters. When Arya returned to the palace of Westeria, she was received as a heroine. The news that she had averted a war spread quickly, and she was greeted by servants and courtiers wherever she went. You did it, Richard said when she arrived at the main hall, pulling her into a tight embrace. You saved us all. It wasn't me, Arya replied. It was love. The love of a father for his daughter, the love of Sarah for Daniel, the love of Isabella. For you? For us? Is Isabella still with you? Yes, but different now, more at peace, as if her mission was finally complete. And does that sadden you? No, Arya replied, surprising herself with the truth of her words. I'm happy for her. She can rest now, knowing that love won. And us? Can we rest too? We can begin to live, Arya replied, kissing him. Really live, without fear, without guilt, without regrets. Then let's get married, Richard said, taking her hands. Tomorrow, if you want. I don't want to wait another day. Neither do I, Arya replied, feeling a pure and intense joy filling her heart. Neither do I. That night, as the preparations for the wedding were finalized, Arya felt Isabella's presence one last time. They weren't words or visions, but a sensation of gratitude, of love, of blessing. Thank you, she whispered into the void, and could swear she heard a voice answering, Thank you for finishing what I started. And then, like a gentle breeze, the presence was gone, leaving Arya alone with her own thoughts, her own feelings, and her own life to live. She was ready to begin. The day of the double wedding dawned with a golden sky that seemed to bless the union that was about to happen. Arya awoke in her chambers, surrounded by servants who prepared everything for the big day, but her mind was strangely calm. For the first time in weeks, she couldn't feel Isabella's presence, and this, surprisingly, didn't make her sad. It was as if the ancient soul had finally found her peace and departed for eternal rest. "Lady Arya," said Jessica, the servant who had become her closest friend in the palace, "it's time to get dressed. The king and his guests are already gathering in the main garden." Arya smiled, feeling a pure and genuine joy filling her heart. "I'm ready, Jessica. More ready than I've ever been for anything in my life." The dress that had been created especially for her was a work of art, white silk with golden threads interwoven, creating patterns that reminded her of the constellations she used to observe at the temple. There was also a delicate veil, but different from those she wore as a veil-bearer. This was a bridal veil, a symbol not of separation, but of union. While Jessica helped her dress, Arya reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Just a few weeks ago, she was an isolated young woman at the temple, trained to absorb the pain of others, but never to experience true joy. Now she was about to marry the man she loved, in a ceremony that would celebrate not only love, but the victory over the traditions that tried to separate them. "You're radiant," Jessica said, stepping back to admire her work, "like a goddess descending from the heavens." "I don't feel like a goddess," Arya replied, touching the necklace Richard had given her, an ancient piece with precious stones that had belonged to the first queen of Westeria. "I feel like a woman who has finally found her place in the world." A soft knock on the door interrupted her. "May I come in?" The voice was Sarah's, who was also preparing for her own wedding. "Of course," Arya replied, and when Sarah entered, both were breathless. The princess was stunning in a sapphire blue dress that enhanced her eyes, with silver details that sparkled like stars. "You look magnificent," Arya said, embracing her friend. "As do you," Sarah replied, tears of joy in her eyes. "Can I believe it's really happening? That we're both going to marry the men we love?" "Sometimes. It still seems like a dream," Arya admitted. "But it's real. We earned the right to be happy." "Daniel is so nervous he can hardly speak," Sarah laughed. "He keeps asking if I really deserve such happiness." "And you always answer yes, I hope." "Always. Just as you should remind Richard that he deserves all the happiness you've built together." They were interrupted by another knock on the door. This time, it was Grandmaster Kevin, who had arrived from the temple especially for the ceremony. He looked different, younger somehow, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "My dear child," he said, and Arya could see unshed tears in his eyes. "You are absolutely radiant." "Thank you for being here, Master," Arya said, embracing him. "It means a lot to me. I wouldn't miss it for the world. You know I had my reservations about this union, but seeing you now, seeing the peace in your eyes, I know I made the right choice in letting you follow your heart." "Have there been changes at the temple?" Arya asked, curious. "Many changes. Your journey has inspired others. We no longer see isolation as the only way to serve. We're exploring new ways to use our gifts to help the world." "I'm glad to hear that," Arya said sincerely. "Love and connection should not be seen as weaknesses, but as forces that make us more powerful." "You taught me that," Kevin replied. "You and Isabella. Speaking of which, can I feel her? Is she still with you?" "She's gone," Arya said, surprising herself with the calmness in her own voice. "Last night I felt her say goodbye. Her mission was complete. And how do you feel about that?" "Grateful. Grateful that she guided me, protected me, showed me the way, but also relieved. Now I can be completely myself, without sharing my consciousness with another soul." "You've grown a lot," Kevin observed. "You're no longer the shy young woman who left the temple." "No, I'm not. I'm a woman who learned that true love doesn't diminish our strength, it multiplies it." The sound of music coming from the main garden indicated that the ceremony was about to begin. Kevin offered his arm to Arya. "Allow me the honor of leading you to the altar, my dear." "It would be a pleasure," Arya replied, taking his arm. The palace's main garden had been transformed into a fairy tale setting. Flowers of all imaginable. Colors decorated the paths, and silk fabrics in golden and silver tones had been arranged between the trees. In the center, 2 altars had been erected side by side, one for each couple. The guests included not only the nobility of Westeria, but also delegates from various kingdoms, including King Albert himself, who had arrived the previous morning with an impressive retinue. Arya could see him in the front row, his eyes fixed on Sarah with a mixture of pride and melancholy. But her eyes were immediately drawn to Richard, who was waiting beside the altar. He was magnificent in his ceremonial robes, golden tunic with details in deep blue, a cape that flowed gracefully in the wind, and a simple but elegant crown that marked his position as king. When their eyes met, he smiled with such intensity that Arya felt her heart race. Beside him, Daniel was also impressive, dressed in the colors of Jefferson in honor of his future wife. His eyes were fixed on Sarah, who was walking toward the altar alongside Arya, and the adoration in his expression was evident to all. The ceremony was conducted by a high priest of Westeria, but incorporated elements of both traditions, that of the temple where Arya was raised and that of Jefferson from where Sarah came. It was a powerful symbol of how different cultures and beliefs could unite in harmony. "We are here today," the priest began, his voice carrying to all corners of the garden, "to celebrate not only the union of 2 souls, but the union of 4. People who found in love a force capable of overcoming any obstacle." Arya looked at Richard, remembering the first time she had seen him, the tension and pain he carried. Now seeing him there, she could see a completely transformed man, still powerful, still impressive, but at peace with himself. "Richard, son of Henry," the priest continued, "do you take Arya as your wife, to love and protect her, in joy and sorrow, in health and sickness? Until death do you part?" "I do," Richard replied, his voice clear and firm. "But not only until death parts us. I promise to love you beyond death, beyond time, beyond anything that might try to separate us." Tears of happiness ran down Arya's face when she made her own vows. "I promise to be your companion, your equal, your strength when you need it, and your source of peace when the world becomes too heavy. I promise to use my gifts not only to heal others, but to nurture and protect the love we share." When they exchanged rings, simple gold rings with ancient runes engraved, Arya felt an energy flowing between them, a connection that was both physical and spiritual. Sarah and Daniel's ceremony was equally moving. Daniel, who had been so nervous in the morning, spoke with an eloquence that surprised everyone when he made his vows. "Sarah, you taught me that true love knows no barriers of class or position. I promise to spend the rest of my life being worthy of the gift you gave me, your heart." "Daniel," Sarah replied, her voice trembling with emotion, "you showed me that true nobility is not in blood but in character. I promise to stand by your side, not as a princess but as a woman who freely chose where to place her love." When the priest finally pronounced both couples husband and wife, the garden exploded in celebration. Music filled the air, flower petals were thrown, and the guests rose to applaud. But the most emotional moment came when Richard kissed Arya. It wasn't just a kiss, it was as if all the emotions they had shared, all the journey that had brought them there, were condensed in that moment. Arya felt as if she were flying, as if the whole world had become brighter. "I love you," Richard whispered against her lips, and she knew they weren't just words. They were a promise, a vow that went beyond any ceremony. "I love you too," she replied, and it meant not just the love she felt at that moment, but all the love she would feel for him in the years to come. The feast that followed was legendary. Tables were arranged throughout the garden, laden with delicacies from both kingdoms. Musicians played melodies that mixed the traditions of Westeria and Jefferson, creating a new music that symbolized the union being celebrated. Arya danced with Richard, feeling more free and joyful than she had ever felt. She also danced with King Albert, who embraced her as if she were a daughter. "Thank you," he whispered in her ear as they danced. "Thank you for giving me back my daughter." "She was never gone," Arya replied. "You just needed to learn to see her as she really is. A strong woman who makes her own choices," Albert said, looking at Sarah, who was dancing with Daniel. "Just like you." "Exactly," Arya agreed. As the night progressed, Arya found herself conversing with guests from all kingdoms. She realized that her story had spread, the story of the veil-bearer who had saved a tormented king and averted a war through the power of love. Some saw her as a heroine, others as an almost mythical figure. "You've become a legend," Sarah said when they met near the central fountain of the garden. "People will talk about you for generations." "That's not what I want," Arya replied. "I don't want to be a legend. I want to be a woman who lived and loved fully." "You can be both," Sarah said wisely. "You can inspire others while living your own happiness." "Perhaps," Arya agreed, looking around the party. "Perhaps that's my new mission, to show that love and power can coexist, that we don't need to choose between being strong and being happy." "You're already doing that," Sarah said, "just by existing, by being here, by having transformed not only your life, but the lives of everyone around you." Later that night, when the party finally began to wind down, Arya and Richard retired to the royal chambers, now their chambers. The room had been redecorated to reflect not just Richard's taste but hers as well. There were books, many books, and crystals she used for meditation and works of art that celebrated both the heritage of Wisteria and the tradition of the veil-bearers. "So," Richard said, closing the door behind them, "how does it feel being a queen?" "I'm still getting used to it," Arya admitted, "but I feel complete, as if all my previous life was just preparation for this moment." "You know what impresses me most about you?" Richard asked, approaching her. "What?" "You kept your essence. Despite everything that happened, all the transformation you went through, you're still the same brave and compassionate woman I met in that garden." "No, I'm not," Arya said, surprising him. "I'm much more. I'm stronger, more confident, more certain of who I am and what I want. You helped me become the woman I always had the potential to be, just as you helped me become the man I wanted to be," Richard replied, taking her hands. "You healed me, Arya, not just from the nightmares and guilt, but from the belief that I was unworthy of love." "You were always worthy of love," Arya said, touching his face. "You just needed to learn to accept it." They kissed again, and this time it was different from all previous kisses. There was no urgency, no fear, no uncertainty. There was only pure love and the promise of a future built together. "There's something I need to tell you," Arya said when they separated. "What?" "Today, during the ceremony, I felt something, a change in me. My powers, they're evolving." "Evolving how?" "Before, I could only absorb pain and suffering. Now, I can do more. I can amplify positive emotions. I can help heal not just traumas, but also strengthen the bonds between people." "How do you know?" "Because that's what I did during the ceremony. I amplified the love among all present. That's why even the most skeptical guests left there believing in the power of true love." Richard looked at her with admiration. "You're becoming something beyond a traditional veil-bearer." "I'm becoming what I always should have been," Arya agreed. "A healer not just of pain, but an amplifier of joy." "And that scares you?" "No. It excites me. I think of all the people we can help, all the couples we can inspire, all the wars we can prevent through understanding." "We? You didn't think I would do this alone, did you?" Richard smiled. "We're a team now. Where you go, I go. What you do, I'll support. Even if it means challenging even more deeply rooted traditions. Especially if it means challenging traditions," Richard replied firmly. "You taught me that some traditions need to be broken for better things to be born." They spent the rest of the night talking about their plans for the future. Richard wanted to establish a new tradition in Wisteria, where marriages would be based on true love, not just political convenience. Arya wanted to create a school where young veil-bearers could learn not just to absorb pain, but to amplify joy and strengthen relationships. "We're going to change the world," Richard said, and it wasn't a question, but a statement. "We are," Arya agreed. "Together." 6 months later, Arya's school was already functioning, and the first class of new veil-bearers was learning revolutionary techniques. Sarah and Daniel had established themselves in a new city, on the border between Westeria and Jefferson, where they were building a community that served as a bridge between the two kingdoms. King Albert had become one of the greatest advocates of the new approach to marriage and love, and there were already 3 other couples in his court who had married for love, not convenience. And Richard. Richard had become known as the golden-hearted king, a ruler who placed the emotional well-being of his people above all else. One night, as Arya walked through the palace gardens, she felt a familiar presence. It wasn't Isabella, the ancient soul had found her peace. It was something different, something new. "Who's there?" she asked softly. "Just a grateful soul," a voice whispered in the wind. "A soul that found peace, because you showed that true love can overcome any obstacle." Arya smiled, realizing it was one of the many souls that had found consolation through the work she and Richard were doing. "Are you at peace now?" "I am. And you?" "I am. Completely at peace." "Then my gratitude is eternal. You taught me that. Even in death, love can be a force of healing." The presence dissipated, leaving Arya alone under the stars. She touched her belly where a new life was beginning to grow, the child that she and Richard had conceived, who would grow up in a world where love was celebrated, not feared. "What a world you will inherit," she whispered to the child who had not yet been born. "A world where love wins, where compassion overcomes fear, where people choose happiness over tradition." "Talking to yourself?" Richard asked, appearing behind her and wrapping her in his arms. "Talking to our child," Arya replied, placing her hands on her belly. "Telling him about the world we're building for him." "Or her," Richard corrected, kissing her neck. "It could be a girl. Boy or girl, they will be loved. They will be free to choose their own destiny." "Just as we chose ours," Richard agreed. They stood there under the stars, 2 souls who had found in love a force capable of transforming not only their own lives, but the world around them. Arya thought of Isabella, of how the ancient soul had finally found peace knowing that love had won. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind, and this time there was no response because none was needed. Love had spoken, and its voice would echo through the centuries, inspiring others to choose courage over fear, passion over convenience, and happiness over conformity. And somewhere in the stars above, Isabella smiled, knowing that her story had finally reached the end it always deserved, not with death and tragedy, but with life, love, and the promise of a better future. Love had won, as it always should have been, and so under the starry mantle of the desert, 2 souls united by destiny and strengthened by true love walked hand in hand toward a future they would build together, leaving behind a legacy of hope that would last forever. The story had ended, but the love that inspired it would continue to live, passing from generation to generation, reminding everyone that in the end love always finds a way.